morning, everybody.
Good morning.
This is Commandment 5. Honor your father and mother. And there are various pieces. After that, which I'll come on to. Let's think about the audience at home. How many of you have two living parents? How many have one living parent? And how many have lost both? Okay, it's almost a third. And as you probably know, or you will hear, while it does say honor your father and mother, there are implications beyond that, but I'm sure about this one. So, Exodus 20:12, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. This is the second of only two commands phrased positively. Although if you go to Deuteronomy 27:16, you get the negative of this one where it says, cursed is the man who dishonors his father and his mother. You probably also know, and I hinted at this last week, that this is often thought of as the beginning of the second section of the Ten Commandments, if you will. Sometimes referred to as the second table. The first table of the law, the first four, focus on human responsibilities to God. The second table in our relationships with one another. Other scholars call it a transitional statement, evident from the fact that the first four focus on the person's responsibility to God, while the 6th through the 10th address how we're to live in covenant community with fellow man. And the 5th being a bridge between the two, because it's not on the same relationship as to God, but it's also above the rest of them. In other words, our parents are authority figures, unlike expressed in 6 through 10. So you might call this a pivotal commandment. It's another name that scholars use from time to time. I came across this, I think I had heard it before, perhaps you have, the saying, we are first children to our parents, then parents to our children, then parents to our parents, and finally children to our children. Some of you didn't get that married again. You're first, the older ones still. We are first children to our parents, then parents to our children, then parents to our parents, and finally children to our children. Many of this can relate to going through those various stages. If you can up to the latter ones, or the latter one, just stay tuned and age a little bit more, and it'll come to you too. You've heard the saying, and I say this to people when I ask, how old are your kids? Well, my kids are 10, 12, and 14, and I say, your IQ is about to drop precipitously. Mark Twain put it this way, when I was 14 years old, my father was so ignorant, I hated to have the old man around. But when I was 21, I was astonished to see how much my father had learned in only 7 years. You know how that goes. I'm going to follow the outlines here. It's a collection of things. I don't know if there's a logical progression I will end up with. If you don't have an outline, I will. So I'll end with, how do we put this to work? But let's talk about some observations along the way. This commandment is foundational to all relationships. Here's what John said. You cannot love God and hate your brother. Therefore, there's some kind of connection, some are inseparable connection, in our duties to man and our love to God. Right relationships. This is not going to work now, so I'm going to go to this. Sorry. Just turn it off. Can you hear me now? Was this one working? Yeah. All right. Sorry for all that. The word honor your father and your mother. Obedience is implied, but it's not the focus. The Hebrew word honor means to be heavy, weighted, and honored. It's the same word used for the glory of Yahweh in the Old Testament. So yeah, obedience is implied, but don't think it's, I gotta do what my mom and father do. No, it's honor them, which has many aspects. Yes, including obedience. More about that in a minute. Mothers, fathers, family, God established the family. We obviously live in a culture where family relationships and familial importance is eroding, perhaps quickly. In fact, we live in a culture where old age is not so revered. You know, we all want the fountain of youth, right? We want to be young all the time. That's the focus. And we work hard to be eternally youthful. There are other cultures where seniority and eldership mean something. Less so here. You can go back to the book of Leviticus, and they actually put value on different ages. Ages 5 to 20, 20 shekels. 20 to 60, 50 shekels. Over 60, 15 shekels. So if you are, or have passed, or close to reaching the age of 60, your value is going to drop really fast. At least in the eyes of the Levitical community. So the command begins, honor your father and mother. It's a command to, I'll use the words, respect, revere, and yes, obey. And when necessary, to care for our parents. And we do that out of respect for God. Yes, because he's put it in the Ten Commandments, but he's also, to repeat, established the family. God shows us the importance of this commandment in a lot of different ways. Let me just list a couple of them. He puts this relationship, as I intimated a few minutes ago, first in the list of horizontal responsibilities. Our vertical relationships are addressed in commands 1 through 4, to repeat. But when we express our horizontal relationships, it starts with honor your father and your mother. In fact, that's where God says it. It goes through commands 1 through 4, and then it says, honor your father and your mother. It also flows out of what is said in the first 4 commandments. First 4 basically say, worship God only, revere God only. And then the 5th commandment, which is our commandment for today. What's the first word out of God's mouth? Honor, revere your parents. I think it's fascinating. We read through the first 4 commandments, and we get these commands. And then this command starts with revering our parents. The word revere. I think that's God's way of pointing to the importance of family, the establishment of family. And is it not at the heart of God's design for humanity? Not to digress and depress, but in our lifetime, we've certainly witnessed the deterioration. The last, 20, 30, maybe 4 years seems like an accelerating rate. View of family is unprecedented in the history of our world and in this country. I'll come back to that. Let's move to the promise of the commandment, which I'm not going to fully address here. Probably won't fully address in period, but I'll come back to it a little later in our time together. The promise, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God gives you. So does this mean that those of us who honor our fathers and mothers are going to live to be 100, and those who don't are going to die early? Not so much. Christians who honor this command, as with all God's laws, will find with obedience comes blessing. As I said, more about that in a few minutes, because I don't want you to be confused or to leave it just there. The scriptural principle, another sentence or two on it, is that obedience to God will result in blessing, while disobedience leads to sin, to misery, and no blessing, to state it in the extreme. Or said differently, if we obey this commandment, life likely will go better for us. There are no guarantees here. It doesn't mean everybody that obeys has a great life and anybody who doesn't has a horrible life. But as I said, more about that. Don't think if I honor my parents, I get to live to 100 years old. Okay, let's talk about, having introduced those subjects, a few of the pieces of where this all comes together. And I said the first one, rights and authority. So it's true that in almost all circumstances, the first person a baby knows is mother and father. There are exceptions, obviously, but that's the pattern. Nothing in this commandment does focus on right or authority of the parent. Some people take that from it, but that's not what's here. The onus of the fifth commandment is on the child of any age. Children to serve our father and mother because that's what God said, not because they're in some authoritative position. Sociologists of all stripes, Christian and non, will argue that if you can't get along with your family, you're probably going to have trouble getting along with anybody else in society. There are studies that show that. So for those that think about this commandment that are not of faith, there is merit to that for our societies. They're not. In Colossians, we read a shorter version. Children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Paul goes on in both Colossians and Ephesians to address fathers in particular, but I think the application is to mothers also. Paul says, bring them up in the, King James, fear and admonition of the Lord. Other translations bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Training means education, of course, in all things. Instruction can mean warning, it can mean rebuke. Which of us as parents, I should have asked that first, how many of you here have children? That's what I was guessing, kind of 75 or 80%. Think about what Jesus said. Which of you fathers, if your son asks for a fish, will give him a snake instead? It implies that the father will be a provider and a protector. A good father encourages his children, 1 Thessalonians 2. We all had human fathers who disciplined us and we respected them for it. That's from Hebrews. So throughout the New Testament, even though we think about it, this is Old Testament, these principles take place. I think it's interesting also when you read about the relationship between Paul and Timothy. It was a father-son relationship, not biologically, but you know the orientation there. And so is there some cooperation and ministry relationship that's implied by what's going on here? I think the answer is probably yes. Relationship to Commandment 1, which to repeat's interesting. We went through if you were in the first service, we confessed using the 10 Commandments today. If you're in the second service, you'll see that. But first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Is there a tension between Commandment 1 and Commandment 5? We see this intention embodied even in the life of Jesus. Remember the incident where he stayed behind in the temple? It's a consternation of his parents. That's Luke 2 if you want to look it up. But afterwards, he went to Nazareth and, used the words of Luke 2, submitted to them. So it's interesting to think about the prioritization. Perhaps obvious, but I think the example of Jesus. By the way, the parents who reject the first commandment can probably expect their children to reject the fifth one. Parents who don't submit to God, how can they expect their children to, quote, submit to that, whatever submit means? All right, I alluded to it already, but let's talk a little bit more about Jesus. Christians in America, you often use the phrase family values to describe biblical values, do we not? And that is a reference to to the fifth commandment, promising long life in the land. In fact, coming back to what I said earlier, God selecting the family as the primary unit of society. Notice that's not the individual, it's not the state, it's not corporations, it's not even the church, it's the family. Jerry Vines, some of you may know that name, said, quote, "Show me a nation where there is disobedience to parents, and I will show you a nation whose foundations are crumbling." The importance, necessity of strong family. So back to Jesus. Remember what he said. He quoted to be accurate. Jesus said he came not to bring peace but a sword. This is from Matthew 10. Continuing, his words were shocking. "I have come to turn a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household." Jesus is warning that faith will divide families. So Jesus' family first, or family values, do not guarantee stability, prosperity, happiness in the sense of the physical family unit. Now, he doesn't stop there. When asked, "Who are my mothers?" he asked himself, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" Looking around at those that circled about him, he answers his own question by saying, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother." So we're not to misunderstand this story. Jesus loved his mother. You saw that at the cross. His brothers, evidence at least at the cross, is they probably did not believe in him like you and I do, but he respected them, loved them. What he was saying is, true family is not bound by physical descent, but by blood, the blood of the cross. To repeat, but at the end of his life, he demonstrated his perfect obedience by providing for care of his mother, and demonstrates the fifth commandment is important in the later years of life, which his mother would have been by then. A few comments on cultural context, and I will digress a bit and speak to us as parents, not just about children. Back in biblical day, cultural development was possible because parents passed on to their offspring knowledge about a whole lot of things. We did not have the internet. They did not have the internet. They did not have books. So where do you get your information and your instruction in life? Answer is from your parents. So children had to respect their parents in order to win in their struggle for survival, one writer says. Children walk in the footsteps of their parents. In earlier centuries, this was evident in the occupational choices people made. If a father was a baker, a saddle maker, or a blacksmith, his son probably followed in the same pursuit. Very different today. I think it's important to understand that cultural context. Today, of course, with the printed word and all kinds of other communication, the role of the parent in these things is certainly diminished. Doesn't mean we can't or shouldn't go to our parents, but naturally there's so many other places. How many of us do what our father did compared to in those days? And yet parents are told to make known to their children the commandments of God. You know this well, Deuteronomy 6. "And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up." The author in Proverbs instructs youth in practical wisdom of living, and we're going to look at Proverbs in a few minutes, a few passages from there as it applies to this commandment. The father, Proverbs 1, confronts his, quote, son, children, with his obligation to listen to the disciplines of his own father, passing it down through the generations. People people understood in that day, and it was almost natural. So let's look at a few Proverbs to see what it says about wisdom passed from father to son or parents to children. Somebody has a Bible, would you look up Proverbs 3:16? Somebody have it? Please, read it. So, length of days, riches and honor, kind of put in the same verse. Son and daughter must learn wisdom, which gives long life, quotes around it. Back to what we said a few minutes earlier. Somebody have Proverbs 1? Yeah, 10 to 16, please. Proverbs 1, 10 to 16.
My son, if sinners entice me, do not listen. For they say, with us, let us lie in wait for blood, let us ambush the innocent without reason. Like Sheol, let us swallow them alive, and whole, like those who go down to the pit. We shall find all precious goods, we shall fill our houses with plunder. Go in your lot among this people, all our common curse. My son, do not walk in the way of them. Hold back your foot from their paths. For their feet run to evil, and they make haste to shepherd.
Thanks. So you heard twice, right at the beginning and the middle. My son, comma, boom, 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 boom. Basically, don't hang around robbers who are laying around waiting to commit violence. Because it could cost you your life, one of those verses said. Pretty important role. How about, who's got Proverbs 2, verses 16 and 18? Somebody read those three verses. Proverbs 2, 16 and 18. Yeah, go ahead. Read them loud so everybody can hear, please.
To deliver thee from the strange woman, even from the stranger who flattereth with her words, which forsaketh the guide of her youth, and forgetteth the covenant of her God. For her house inclineth unto death, and her path unto the dead.
Proverbs 2, much of that chapter is this father warning his son about hanging around with immoral women. Proverbs 5, verse 23. 5:23. Somebody read that? Bless God.
He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray.
So, such a fool is going to die. He lacks discipline, and he strays. I forget the word that translation used, but Ryan uses the word great stupidity. Fathers can warn children against that. A couple more. Proverbs 21, verse 25. It's about laziness, sloth. Do you have a problem?
Is it 125?
No, 21, 25. I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say that.
Say you didn't wonder.
Go ahead.
Being lazy, so read it. For his hands refused labor.
Laziness. Slothfulness. Father warning his son what the consequences are. Pretty important lessons in life, are they not? Very practical and very important. Yeah, we have time for two more. Proverbs 10, verse 21. If you've never in your life studied Proverbs, take a couple months and do it. One verse after the other. Wisdom for life. But I've picked out ones where it's a father telling a child about certain things that apply to any of us in a sense. Who's got Proverbs 10:21? Yes.
The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for the lack of sense.
Okay, fools die from lack of understanding. Whereas the first part of the verse, the good is understanding, and that's some translation have it, a fountain of life. One verses can make just amazing wisdom. One more, and then I'll shut up on this piece. Proverbs 2, 21 and 22. Proverbs 2, 21 and 22. Chapter 2, verses 21 and 22. Yeah, please.
For the upright will live in the land, and the blameless will remain in the land. But the wicked will be cut off from the land, and the faithful will be torn.
Again, great wisdom from a father to a son. Or can I say a parent to a child? Very basic. The upright will dwell in the land, but the unfaithful will be uprooted from it. Who doesn't need that wisdom? Another digression back to parents. By the way, discipline is not designed for fathers and mothers to let off steam. We must discipline our children in wisdom, not out of impulse. I know I'm guilty over the years. Sometimes I get mad and I lose my temper. That's not really helpful. Education. The education obligation starts with parents. Doesn't mean you educate them in everything. You might send them to school, public school, private school, Christian school, home school. But that's a responsibility that parents clearly have, especially in the early years where it's most important. Another important point for parents: if children at home never hear talk about God and who He is and what He's done and what we can do in service to others, how are you going to think your child's going to choose God? If we're not living it, you get the point. Nurture your children in a particular direction. And that, by the way, if you've done everything right, does not guarantee your children are going to follow. But it sure raises the probabilities. Parents can warn children to make the right choice, even when those children are adults, but you can't force them to make the right choice. Discipline has stages and limits. We're not to get guilt trips because we failed somewhere. Back to honoring parents. Honoring parents has several aspects, and I'm sure it's a much longer list that I'm going to give you. In fact, I have a few lists. The one I'm talking about here is the natural notion means, one, to take heart the instruction given by our parents. Take heart by the instruction given. To honor is to listen. The word hearken, to listen, means children will attempt to show deference toward our parents at any age. Now, let me go to the Old Testament. Rachel addressed her father with the phrase, "My Lord," Genesis 31. Now, I'm not suggesting we'll go home and say to your kids, from now on, call me my Lord. Not going to work. But it worked in those days. It was a more formal culture, obviously. God bless you. So, showing deference. Obviously, the word love's got to be in here somewhere. Honoring the parents also includes loving them. The Bible tells us that. Self-evident, in a sense. We will endure, many of the Proverbs say this, trouble and poverty if we ignore this piece of it. Thirdly, I wrote down, honoring involves being faithful to our parents. Especially as our parents become old and less able to take care of themselves. In our day and age, there are lots of social safety nets, so it's not necessarily monetary, but in some cases it surely is. And back in that day, it was everything about that. You took your parents back into your house, if they even left your house. As you know, multiple generations lived in the same place. I remember my mom's advice. She died of Alzheimer's at 92 when she was still semi-cognizant in her 80s. So, Mom, you have any advice? Yep, don't get old. Don't get old. But you know, there's a sense of joy, is there not, when we can look at Jesus, as it were, and say, I've done what I can. That I've honored my parents. You don't know what you're going to get back. I'm about to say about that in a minute. And that relationship, as we suggested at the very beginning, and I'll talk about again some more in a second, is endemic to our relationship with the whole family of God. So those of you who have no children and your parents are gone, there's an opportunity and responsibility to apply the principle here. I don't know about you other moms and dads, but I know for less than me, there's a sense of incredible joy when the family's together. We had them, all three of our kids, for a few hours on Christmas Eve. And it was great. We're all together. Now, I did not do it, thankfully, Christmas Eve, but other times I'll get a little teary, and one of the kids, usually my son, said, Dad, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, son. There's a sense of gratitude for the rich blessing of, and I see some head nodding, children. Okay, comments, questions so far before we go to this last putting commandment into practice? I have some very basic things to say. Any comments or questions? Thoughts you've had as you've been a parent or been a child and had to honor your father and your mother? Yes, sir.
Probably the best definition of parents of their word was not doing anything to embarrass them.
Yeah, that's good. Don't embarrass your parents. Well said. I suspect many of us have embarrassed our parents, particularly when we're little kids, but maybe later in life too. Anybody else? Okay, putting this commandment into practice. Tackle this via 4 questions. What does it mean to honor our parents? Are there limits? Why should we honor our parents? And what practically might it look like? Before going there, I came across, as I was doing a little study around this, a little story I'm going to read to you. A young woman brings home her fiancé to meet her parents. After dinner, her mother tells the father to find out more about the young man. The father invites the fiancé into his study. So, what are your plans? The father asks the young man. I'm a Bible scholar, he replies. Oh, a Bible scholar, wow. Admiral, but what are you going to do to provide a nice house for my daughter to live in that she's accustomed to? The young man replies, I will study, and God will provide for us. And how will you buy a beautiful engagement ring such as she deserved? Asks the father. The fiancé responds, I will concentrate on my studies, and God will provide for us. And children, ask the father, how will you support the children? Don't worry, sir, God will provide, the man says. The conversation proceeded like this for a while. Each time the father questions, the young idealist insists that God will provide. Later on, the mother asks, well, how did it go? The father answers, well, he has no job, he has no plans, but the good news is he thinks I'm God. I kind of like that story. Okay, what does it mean to honor our parents? We've already talked about this some, but let me quote Calvin. Honor requires 3 things: reverence, obedience, and gratitude. The reverence is not because our parents are always deserving of it in themselves. He went on to say, I've had many occasions where I said, I can't believe I just spoke or acted like that. It's not because we're always deserving of it, but because of the position of authority that God has given the parents. We have been given a noble title: mom, dad, mother, father. That's why almost all of us would insist that our kids shouldn't call us by our first names. It's not just out of sense of respect, but also because, quote, everyone else can call me Bob, but only you can call me Dad, I say to my kids. There is a reverence there, is there not? To be a parent is to be a weighty thing. So we Gratitude, which is the third thing Calvin said, one of the chief ways that we can honor our parents, is it not? This writer says, I didn't understand that till I was a parent. The life of a parent is one of constant sacrifice. And many of you are parents can point to that. Lack of sleep, sacrifice of money, time, energy, desires, sometimes tears. It's an office, parent is an office of great responsibility and great sacrifice. So one of the ways we can honor our parents who've sacrificed so much for us is simply being grateful. Yes, grateful to God, but grateful to them. They like to hear it. That was pretty basic, I know. But think about it. How can we apply that? Number 2, are there limits to honoring parents? The answer is obviously yes. If your parents ask you to do something that's totally contrary to the Word of God, you will first to observe what God says. In a loving and respectful way. I come back to the first table of the law. If we're violating that because of something our parents have asked for, it's a problem. Now, I didn't talk about it much, but obviously as years go by, both relationship from child up to parent, parent down to child changes. You don't say, if you're 50 years old, you don't call up your 25-year-old kid and say, who has 2 kids and say, you need to do this for the kids. You might generally say, have you thought about? Conversely, when you're 25 and the kids are, 4, do not do that. It's okay. You get it. I think there's another aspect here that comes up as we think about these subjects that's broader than just parenting, but it starts with parenting. And that is discipleship and mentoring. I'm thrilled this church is working on discipleship so that we don't remain the shallow Christians that some of us are. To you older guys and gals, particularly as you become empty nesters and et cetera, and I'm looking in the mirror as I say this, mentoring, discipling. I know even with our own son, I say to Bobby, you want to talk? Let's have a regular time where we talk. Because I can tell you some things so you don't make the same mistakes I made. You're going to make mistakes, but rule mine out. Don't make those again. Figure out how you can be a mentor to your child and to others in your community. Why should we honor our parents? I think we've talked about that, but let me repeat. Ephesians 6:1. We are to obey our parents in the Lord. It's part of our devotion to Jesus, not just to our parents. It starts with our obligation to Jesus to honor mother and father. That doesn't mean we have to be around them all the time. Some take that to extreme, or maybe the other way around, as kids think, do I have to be with my mom and dad all the time? Of course you don't. Colossians 3:20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. I love Mary, Luke 5. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. Our parents think about us a lot. Respect that. Be thankful for that. Okay, back to, at least in my view, when I first thought, I'm going to teach we will live long in the day. Paul bailed me out. Ephesians 6. Paul gives a variation of the promise, and I think the intention, honor your father and mother, that it may go well with you. Do you remember that? It's just not about living a long time. You can live to be 100 and have a miserable life. Or you can live to some younger number of years, and things may go well with you. You know, God could have just said, honor your father and your mother, or else. Paul could have done the same thing. The first commandment with a big threat is how we would have looked at it if it was said that way, right? So instead, God says, don't you want to experience blessings in life? Yeah, I do, Lord, I do. Don't you want things to go well with you instead of having disasters? Well, yeah, I do. Well, then honor your father and your mother, that things might go well with you. I read another study as I was flipping through, thinking about what I'm going to say. In the social science field, both liberals and conservatives come to the same conclusion. Study after study shows that the best predictor for health as an adult, making it through school, staying out of jail, etc., is what happened in the home. Study after study. Yes, there are exceptions, obviously, but there's a high correlation between health at home and honoring mother and father, and a mother and father being in the home, of course, and how the kids turn out. So yeah, God has all kinds of reasons for saying the things he does. But you know, he wants this place to be a better place. Very practical. Okay, how can we obey this commandment? I've got 5 very simple ways to obey this commandment. First is yes, mom or dad. Cheerful obedience. Now, you don't do it when you don't agree. You don't say yes when you're not going to do what they suggest. But you know, when we suggest something to our kids and they say, yeah, that's a good idea, and then they go do it, is that ever satisfying, right? Shake your head, yes, somebody, please. Thank you. Prompt, cheerful obedience is what I wrote down. Prompt and cheerful. Teach that to your kids. You'll feel better. Second, thank you. Is that ever basic? But you know, I wish my mom and dad were here after us spending time bringing up our kids. I'd have a longer conversation with them. I didn't realize being a parent included boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, bada boom, right? Say thank you for things in the present and longer term. So if you're parents that are living and conscious, etc., think about having a special time to thank them for life. Write them a nice note. I don't mean a Hallmark card and sign your name. I mean your words. Thank you, Mom or Dad. Number 3, and this implies not just parent-child relationships, but all relationships. I'm sorry. Not, I'm sorry if you were offended. You know, I've heard that line. You're basically saying, not my fault. You just got offended. Or, I'm sorry, but what they did was worse. No. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. And finished. Relief, reconciliation, particularly with something big. Number 4, let me take care of that. As parents age and they become less able to do things physically or otherwise, a simple let me take care of that can make all the difference. They may be over like some insurance policy, going nuts trying to figure it out when you know you can solve it like that. I don't know what the issue is, but let me take care of that. Relieves them of all kinds of consternation. Finally, number 5, I just said, say hello. Obviously, it's broader than that, but showing up. And I get a phone call. I know when Leslie gets on the phone with her mom or dad, I can almost hear them saying, thank you for calling. Right? You called them both yesterday, didn't you? Thank you for calling. They love hearing from their kids. They love hearing from you. Your parents love hearing from you. Showing up. Now, some live far away. It's not practical all the time, but I come back to, if my 3 kids were sitting right here, I said, thank you for all showing up on Christmas Eve together for a few hours. Holidays especially, all so important for parents. Yeah, I've gone past time as usual. Any final questions or comments before I pray? I hope this has been helpful. I deliberately made it basic because I knew in the room there'd be people who had to say goodbye to their parents, maybe never knew their parents or one of them. And some with parents who, are not mentally cognizant any longer. Some with kids in this room, some without. Any more comments or questions? Let me pray. Father in heaven, we love you. We thank you that you are our Father. And boy, can we learn parenting from you. Thank you for being such a good and perfect Heavenly Father. As we go through life, have all kinds of experiences, as we receive your love and learn to honor you, earlier commandments, help us with this commandment. Help us to honor our earthly parents, that it might go well with us. May we live in this land and enjoy all the blessings you have in store. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week, everybody. Next week, murder, thou shalt not.